everything must change. It's the nature of life. And the biggest challenge for humans is to be not okay with that, but into it, participating in it. Participation is the operative word for 2019. I've been speaking about the great minds that contributed to the modern articulation of this ancient truth. Last week I spoke about Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, and he sparked my imagination because he was a humble man, a clockmaker with no education, but a curious mind. And he allowed himself to follow his curiosity and became immersed in experimenting with mesmerism, which we know today as hypnosis, to where he got to the point where he realized he didn't need to put anyone in an altered state, that he could tap into their subjective mind and pull out what needed to be known in the moment. And so his conclusion was, mind is cause and mind is cure. Father of New Thought. New Thought is the generic name for this teaching. And you know something? It has been around since the beginning of human consciousness. We call it a teaching today, but actually it is what you might call the truth. There are perceivable truths about the universe, and one of them is something that you can demonstrate, that you can prove to yourself, that mind is cause and mind is cure. And this teaching has arisen down through the ages and then been suppressed. Many times it was suppressed by institutions, churches, governments. It was suppressed in Jesus' time. In fact, he was crucified for saying it, and so was Buddha. And many other scientists have lost their funding because they got on this page. But now, with the men I'm talking about and the women I'm speaking about this month, it has resurfaced in a modern languaging of it, and it is never going away again. It is mainstreamed now. When I first came into this teaching in 1975, there were no books on it except a few in our bookstore at the center. There was nothing in a regular bookstore. Now it's huge. There's a whole section on spirituality, on New Thought. It's everywhere. So today I'm speaking about one of those people who was so influential to Dr. Ernest Holmes, who formulated it in this particular way that it is today. And that's Ralph Waldo Emerson. The other day I was looking at I have thousands of blogs I've written over the years, and they're all on my computer. And so I just typed in Emerson's name, and it came up almost in every one of them. I'm always quoting him. He was and is the most often quoted American, second only to Abraham Lincoln. So I thought I would throw out some of his quotes just for you to say, oh yeah, that's who that was, or oh, yeah, I knew that. And the first one is, hitch your wagon to a star. What a great quote. That could pretty much sum up this teaching. You know, place your intention on a great idea, a big idea, a new idea, something you've never done before, something that'll push you, pull you, challenge you a little bit. Hitch your wagon to a star and see where it takes you. And then he said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And a foolish consistency is sticking to what you think is so and never challenging it, never looking at it, insisting on it. I'm right about this. I know I'm right about this, even though your life isn't working so well, right? I've done that. Haven't you done that? We all know the ego wants to be right no matter what. Okay. He said, get your bloated nothingness out of the way of the divine circuits. The bloated nothingness is that cluttered up mind that is seeing everything from the ego's point of view. I want, I need, I gotta have. Where is it? I don't have it. Do your thing and I shall know you. Now, in the 60s, the kids picked that one up, and it was just do your thing. Just go do your thing, man. You'll be fine, just do your thing. And it's very good advice. So whatever you do authentically that expresses you, then I know you. I can see you. I can identify who's in front of me, right? And we know ourselves when we do what is ours to do. And everybody has something that is theirs to do alone. It's not that nobody else is doing it, but nobody's doing it in your way. saying it how you say it, or sing it how you sing it. Be and not seem. I'll talk a little bit more about that one later. But here's my favorite one. With consistency, a great soul simply has nothing to do except repeat. Only the finite has wrought and suffered. The infinite lies resting in smiling repose. Isn't that beautiful? We're saying that the source of life, if you choose to call it God, you can. But the source of life is not troubled by anything we're experiencing. It's all good. It's life happening. Everything must change. And there's a way for it to evolve and become more, not by suppression, but by expression. We become more of who we really are. And this, a couple more, accept your genius and say what you think. He was really big on the concept that every human being has a genius within them and a way of expressing it like nobody else. And that if children were only taught that when they were little kids, if it was acknowledged by the way we do school, that you're just a genius, express it, let's see what you can do, the world would be very different. And a man passes for what he is worth, or we should say what we think we're worth. So really, almost every sentence in his famous book of essays is quotable. Seriously, if you haven't ever read those essays, I urge you to do so. Some of us did it in school. Some of us never heard of him. I first heard of him, I heard the name, but never read him until I came into this teaching. And I bought this book at the center that I was involved in Kona, Hawaii, and I took it to the beach, Ho'omalu Beach, and I sat there and laughed out loud. He is hilarious in his ability to penetrate through human nature. But not only that, he's poetic. So he has this combination. What he did for me was validate the mystic in me. And most of us were mystics as children. And what is a mystical experience if not feeling one with everything, feeling unified with something unnameable, that you're it, you're part of it, you're participating in it. And so he validated that for me, that there was an intellectual rationale for that. So that, a friend of mine who was a minister said this teaching, I think I've said this before here, but I'll say it again. He said, this teaching healed my heart without insulting my intelligence. And so it's a both and. It's not one or the other. It's a both and. So he was known as the Sage of Concord. Concord, Massachusetts is where he lived. And he always expressed his deep reverence for nature, because he lived in a house on the edge of the woods. And so his life was very balanced. He was going out and speaking and writing these wonderful essays and articles and books, and then he'd walk in the woods, and then he'd go listen to the crow and watch the eagles. And he lived very near Walden, where Henry David Thoreau spent his life. And the only reason Henry David Thoreau was able to do that is because Emerson financially supported him his entire adult life. Emerson supported a lot of people financially so that they could do their thing. Concord at that time was the font of American spirituality. Just as an add-on, William James, who wrote The Varieties of Religious Experience and is a very respected scholar, said that this teaching was the only true American contribution to the body of religious knowledge. He was talking about what we talk about here. So at that time, it was Concord, Massachusetts, and that's where all the transcendentalists lived. Walt Whitman, Jonathan Parker, Margaret Fuller, one of the few women involved, Henry David Thoreau, Bronson Alcott, the father of Louisa May Alcott, and many others. And they lived in that area, and they got together and discussed these great ideas of transcendentalism. The same thing was actually going on in Europe, too, especially in Germany. But this was a very American version. At one point, he was invited to speak to the Divinity School of Harvard and never got asked back because he denounced religion as a regurgitation of worn-out old ideas. He was asked back at the end of his life, but that was many years later. In 1835, at the age of 31, he wrote this about being a... And I've always taken it as my own personal creed of how I want to be. He said, "The teacher that I look for and await shall enunciate with more precision and universality, with piercing poetic insight, those beautiful yet severe compensations that give to moral nature the aspect of mathematical science. He will not occupy himself in laboriously reanimating a historical religion, but in bringing people to God by showing them that God is, not was, God speaks, not spoke." I love that. Now, here was this man living in a time of slavery, and he was an abolitionist all the way. And he spoke about anti-slavery all the time. He railed against it, tried to convince people. And of course, he lived in the northern part, but still, it was everywhere. And that sentiment was everywhere. So he had this democratic heart, I guess you could say. He once said, "I love man, but not men." In other words, he loved humanity, but he had trouble with individuals. Can you relate? Sure you can. But he had this penetrating mind, and he seemed to see right to the heart of the matter, whether it was the heart of a person or a situation or an idea. Here's something he wrote in 1847. Now, see if you can't hear the wisdom in this as it applies to today. He called this superstitions of our age, 1847. The fear of Catholicism, the fear of poverty, the fear of immigration, the fear of manufacturing interests, the fear of radicalism or democracy, and faith in the steam engine. Everything must change, but not everything has, right? But it is. Okay. I could spend all day quoting him, but his influence on the founder of this teaching in this form was really profound. He had studied, like Ernest Holmes and like Thomas Troward, who I'm speaking about next week, they'd all studied the Eastern mystical traditions, called the Oriental religions in those days. And they studied Buddhism and Hinduism, and they really gleaned what they called the truth from those, as well as what the man Jesus was teaching. And in modern times, if he were living today, he would see it in quantum physics. He would see it in science as well. But his mystical nature was kind of inherent. He loved his home in Concord, as I said, near Walden. And he wrote about nature and his love of it over and over and over again. But so our roots are really in transcendentalism, as far as what we might call modern times. As I said, this goes way back to the beginning of human thinking. But in Self-Reliance, which is my favorite essay of his, he wrote about the divine being in everything. And that's what transcendentalism is really about, is that who we are, what we are, is greater than what we do, what we have done, what we see outside of us, physical life. We are transcendent of it. There's an aspect to our nature that transcends the limitation of physical laws. I mean, just to throw this in, we have actually transcended gravity by going to the moon. We did it with machines, but we did it. We transcended a law that looked like something you could never master, right? We've done that with many things. Someday it will be beam me up, Scotty, I'm pretty sure. That's the next step. But in Self-Reliance, he talked about, and in the Oversoul, he talked about the soul of the person, meaning the real self. That transcendent self, that spark of the divine, God within, and he called it the soul. He said the soul, when we let it appear through our actions, would make our knees bend. When it breathes through our intellect, it is genius. When it breathes through our will, it is virtue. When it breathes and flows through our affections, it is love. We are, he believed, transcendent of all earthly experience, that we are greater than what we pass for. and that there is an oversoul inherent in each one of us, and that it's our responsibility to allow that aspect, that truth, that whole self, entrance into our life through our actions, through what we allow, through what we promote, through what we praise, through what we participate in, through the choices we make and the way we express those choices. And this is what it means to be and not seem. You know, he was a great one to say, you know, quit talking about it, do it. One of his quotes, which is ironic in today's talk, is, I hate quotations, tell me what you know. That's what he used to say. So he said, I desire not to disgrace the soul. The fact that I am here certainly shows me that the soul had need of an organ here. Shall I not assume the post? So what about you and me? Are we not also some kind of expression of something greater? Do we feel as if we are a random act of nature, or are we an intentional expression of something? The answer makes all the difference in how we see life and how we treat ourselves and what we think we have a right to expect. So however we see ourselves, it is self-evident that we are something greater than our experience. If that were not true, we would never recover from anything. We would never get over anything. We would never have a new idea. We are greater than any experience we've ever had. We would never invent, discover, create, and nothing would change unless there was something greater than the change. Does that make sense? Yes. That's a really important point in our teaching. We are greater than any experience we're having now or have ever had. And that means you are not bound by the precedent of your childhood. My sister used to say, when they get to be 12, they need to start hunting for food. But that was a joke. But what she meant was, by the time you're 12, you're almost an adult, and you ought to be able to do some things, like cook a meal, sew on a button. And so that's kind of how it was with us when we were kids. We were doing all sorts of things when we were little. But as you grow older, and if we don't recognize the principles of mind is cause and mind is cure, it's very easy to start blaming the past for how life is now. Very easy. I mean, it almost makes sense. But according to Emerson and Holmes and Troward and Quimby, it's just not true. And I said this before, and we can't say it enough. It's what happened. It's not what is. It's not who you are. You are not labeled by anything that's ever happened to you in the past. So think about this. A human being can take paint and a canvas and make something so beautiful it inspires people for generations. Look at Van Gogh, look at Picasso, look at Rembrandt. I mean, you stand in front of those pictures and something happens to you because the energy comes through it. They did their thing and we know them through their work. A musician can take notes on a page and turn them into magical sounds that can soothe and inspire. A writer can use words to elevate public discourse. Who does that if they're not greater than the experience? You know, those are just a few examples. Everyone in this room does that all the time. So we are greater than what we do in every case. You know, another thing that in one of his essays he talked about, I've actually used this example before, but he talked about when we look at a skyscraper, we go, wow, but we forget the little hand that built it. And then he said, what about the intelligence that told the hand what to do? What about the mind that learned how to do it so that it wouldn't fall down? I mean, that's another example. We are greater than anything that we do. So in times of trouble, here's another of his famous sayings. Up again, old heart. Let's get on with it. Now, he was very much a master of his own emotions and mind. And one of the most extraordinary examples is this one. His beloved home was set on fire and it burned to the ground. Completely destroyed it. I have a book of his journal entries. The only thing he ever said about that experience was, house burned. That's it. No, why did this happen to me? What does this mean? How could that possibly be so? What will I do without it? I'll never be able to do it again. House burned. That's why people often thought he was cold. But he wasn't. He had a heart on fire. But he also had a mind that was very clear about its power, and that what he thought and what he said created his experience. So that's when he said, let's take our bloated nothingness out of the way and let the divine circuits come through and make something right about this. Have you ever had something happen in your life that was really hard, and then you look back and say, oh my gosh, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be doing this, and this is wonderful, right? It's a common experience if we just relax and let things change, as you so beautifully sang this morning. Thank you. I love that song, and I love the way she did it. In his lifetime, he buried his first wife, Ellen, who he adored. She was described as beautiful, graceful, lovely, intelligent, and she died quite young. Then his 6-year-old son, Waldo, died. Then his mother and his brothers. Yet he never lost his sense of the beauty and wonder of it all. He said, let us take our bloated nothingness out of the way of the divine circuits. Let us unlearn our wisdom of the world. Let us lie low and learn the truth that alone makes us rich and great. It reminds me of something Ernest Holmes said, is that sit with the cause. Rather than try to muck around in effects and figure out how they happen, go back to the cause. In 2014, I wrote this after reading Emerson. I thought I'd share it. I found it when I was looking around on the computer. And I was paraphrasing him. He said, if we put the tiniest life form under a microscope, it would not appear less perfect than the largest one. You know, the solar system of the planets orbiting around a central light is it's throughout everything. It's in our bodies, it's atoms and electrons. It's all the same thing, the same pattern. So I noticed once a large spider web attached to some foliage. It was so perfectly engineered, so right for its purpose, so well done and so beautiful, that my first thought was how intelligent that 8-legged being must be. The higher truth, of course, is that intelligence has taken the form of a spider and is living that reality just for the joy of it, just for the fun of it, just because it can. That's true of us, too. So is God being us for the sheer fun of experiencing life in the third dimension, in time and space? I'm convinced that's true. That something takes form just for the joy of it, just for the fun of it, just to experience multi-dimensions, and there's probably jillions of them throughout this universe. Would it matter to the one how each life played out? Now, this is demanding that we go way up, way back, and look at this whole thing but maybe the way Shakespeare would. We're all players in a play. We're all actors on a stage, right? Would it matter how each life played out? Is true freedom the right to create lack and ugliness as well as prosperity and beauty? That's how free we are. That's how much power we have. Think of the spider as an example of a being that is undeterred by what else may be happening in the garden. She does not have conflicting thoughts about her existence. She acts according to what is natural to her. She's doing her thing. That being the case, she's always successful. So you and I have access to an intelligence that is transcendent of the limits of time and space. That is, we can imagine a future, we can remember a past, we can invent what has never been seen before. We are quite capable of building webs of belief that act as support for dramatic change. The way we use our natural intelligence determines the degree of lack or abundance, vitality or weakness, joy or sorrow, fear or love that we draw into our web. Come into my den, said the spider to the fly. Is that how that went? Law of attraction. There's no judgment regarding what we spin or how we toil. There's only success. That's a profound truth. So living in time-space is what in India they would call walking the razor's edge. It's a tightrope. To be fully present, participating in the physical life, while at the same time knowing that you are greater than it and you are transcendent of it, and ultimately it cannot diminish you one iota. It cannot lessen your soul one bit. I don't care what happens. And there are millions of human beings who have told their stories that prove that truth. People that survived the most awful things come out fully intact and ready to start expressing again. Those are the ones they're like you. They have an idea that life is greater than we thought it was, that life is more beautiful than we thought it was, that there's something behind it all that is more personal than we thought it was. So we take this power out of the sky and bring it right down home into the body, into the mind, and realize in some way it is allowing for me to express who I really am. And that would be it in this form, this personality. You know, there's a wonderful thing to think about God, if you will. There's a difference between caring and concern. So a person who can look at your problem and cares that you're in pain, cares that there's something that's troubling you, but is not concerned about it because that person can see through it to the solution, that's compassion. And that's what Emerson had. People called him stoic, they called him cold, but actually he had compassion. He saw right through it. So spirit, God, is like that. You could say, if you want to put it in our language, God cares, but is not concerned. Because it's an unconditional love that allows the object of love to completely express itself any way it wants to. And what that means to us is it's a big responsibility to decide what we're willing to support and participate in, what we're going to promote, what we're going to praise, what we're going to allow to be in our life, in our personal experience, all the time remembering that we are transcendent of the past and that God speaks now. God is now, is present. So I invite you to say some words after me, if you want to. My life is the visible evidence of the presence of God, creating beauty and abundance. And so it is. Let's go into treatment. Let's take this a little deeper. What a joy it is to really feel the presence of this wonderful something that we have named in many ways. But we know it is real. We feel it as the aliveness of our body. We feel it as ideas that flood into our mind. We feel its presence as guidance, as intuition, as a simple knowing who we are and what to do. We feel it welling up in us as compassion for the other, as caring, as a desire to help. We feel the presence of God when we love and when we allow love to have its way with us. We know that God is real when we give without thinking of anything in return. When we enter into the game of circulation with abandon like a child at play. We feel the presence of God through music and beauty and silence. And I know for each person here that we are a part of something that has been attempting to come through humanity's collective awareness since the beginning of consciousness. And so we give ourselves fully into it by taking it personally. These truths are about me, about my mind, my life, my possibilities, my expectations. And so I begin with the simplest idea. I love myself. I love being me. I love this life I am living. I love what is possible. And I know I am an eternal being, forever becoming more of who I already am. So I affirm that everyone here has something deep that has shifted or awakened or dissolved. Something has happened. Because everything is always changing according to the latest idea we have about it. And so today, I affirm that our ideas are high. They are spiritualized ideas. They are ideas of our greatness, our potential, humanity's greatness and potential, and that we are not concerned about what we see outside going on in the world, because we know there is an answer, and that answer is coming through each and every one of us. It is arising in our collective consciousness. It is the light of our truth pushing up what is unlike it, that it might be healed as it's revealed. So we're not concerned, but we do participate in the answer. So with great gratitude for this place where we meet, for each other, for the teaching and all of the teachers who've come before us, we simply say, all is well, forever becoming more. Life is good, and so it is. Let's say that out loud. Life is good. Business is great. People are wonderful.